Okay, everyone. It is 5:05 now, and I think it'll be a good time for us to start this conversation today. Good afternoon and good evening. My name is Tahil Sharma, and I'm the Regional Coordinator for North America at the United Religions Initiative. And it's my pleasure today to be able to bring us together for this fourth conversation on building the World House. Um, we have been hosting this panel series throughout the year, and it's been an amazing space and opportunity to be able to learn from some really brilliant voices. And you will get to hear from another couple of really important voices today. So it's really amazing to have this space available and to take this opportunity to be able to engage with you all. Um, Dr. Martin Luther King spoke of the world as a family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest, who, because we can never live apart again, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace. It takes every kind of person, because of who they are, to build and inhabit the world independently and with mutual responsibility. This panel series and discussion furthers Dr. King's vision of pluralism. Each panel centers on a particular cultural or social identity while representing various religious, spiritual, and secular worldviews within the community. This is an opportunity to engage with interfaith and intersectional voices about what builds and sustains a thriving, equitable, peaceful, and inclusive society. Being that the United Religions Initiative is the main organizer for this event here in North America, we are very thankful for our partnership with the University of Laverne's Office of Religious and Spiritual Life and for the support of the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles and Interfaith America, because it takes, the village of the beloved community to be able to put this event together. Um, Today's event is going to be, focusing specifically on the voices of our Latina siblings within the interfaith movement. Um, and for those of you who are, you know, entering the space today, it's important to think about why we've created a space for the Latina community, one whose richness, spans centuries, due to indigenous cultures and traditions. We do have to acknowledge that in the spaces that we work in today, much of the Spanish-speaking world in Central and South America, as well as those who speak Portuguese and the like, often don't find themselves represented in interfaith spaces here in the United States. Very similar to other cultures and communities that often don't get heard from in interfaith spaces, we wanted to create an opportunity to have some honest conversation about people who have been involved in interfaith work in certain ways, either at the campus at the University of Laverne, who have gone into the world, or who have found that experience in different spaces where they've done that work. And I couldn't think of three better people to be able to have this conversation today, because these are my colleagues, these are my friends, these are my beloved people who have done this work on campus and off campus. These are folks that I know have really taken seriously the idea that interfaith cooperation is a value add into their life, and that their presence continues to be a value add to those who continue to work with them. So I'm happy to introduce my colleagues Vanessa Oceguera, Mariela Martinez, and Jacqueline Perez Valencia. Three wonderful women who have done a lot of good work in the world, and folks who are the perfect fit for this conversation today. Um, Unfortunately, Jackie is experiencing a bit of a delay in joining us, so we will hope that she joins the conversation sooner rather than later. But we're definitely going to start off with who we have here at the moment and jump right in. So I'm going to start with a pretty complicated question because it is about you at the end of the day. But Vanessa and Mariela, I'd like you to think about what identities and communities and professions bring you into this conversation today. What parts of your upbringing and what parts of your current social identities, impact the way that you navigate the world? And either of you can go first. There's no rush to speak.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'll go first. If that's okay. So I am Latina. I know I don't look it because I'm as white as a ghost, but I am, trust me. And so I'm Latina, and I have a pretty vast experience with the Christian communities. I was raised Catholic. For about 10 years, I was going to a Presbyterian church because that's where I felt home. Like I built a home there at a Presbyterian church. Right now, I feel the safest at an Episcopalian church. So when I saw the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles was sponsoring this event, I was like, yeah. So yeah, and I would identify as progressive Christian, as well as an interfaith leader. So I think my progressive Christian identity drives the actions I take as an interfaith leader. More recently, I was a public relations associate for an international spiritual organization that teaches meditation in LA. It's called Self-Realization Fellowship. I don't work there anymore. I quit for my own mental health, but for 4 years, I worked as the public relations associate, sharing these messages of inner peace and being an ally to this spiritual organization.
I always struggle to find the unmute button. Thank you so much for hosting us, and also Vanessa for sharing yourself. It's always great to hear from you again. Hello, everyone. My name is Mariela. Yeah, you really started with the hard balls. I don't know. I would say that some of the practices and worldviews that grounded me in my beginnings was growing up Catholic in Mexico. So my earliest memories are my grandma hosting the rosary every night at her house. And I used to live at my grandma's house. So that was me every day, seeing the community come together at her house for posadas and so many other things. And so growing up, my idea of Catholicism and of religion was that it's a space to come together, to help each other out, to be in community with each other. And then later, when I immigrated to the US, I continued to be Catholic, except, Catholicism practiced a little different in the US. And so I think that, among other things, led to my estrangement, legal divorce from Catholicism. And so I now identify as an atheist, secular spiritual person who believes that all worldviews are sacred and beautiful, but there is no right way or only way to do things. And so the way I choose to live my life is by holding the belief that human life, everyday life, is sacred, and that it is in my and other people's best interest to live it as fully and as compassionately as possible. And I hope live to do that by working in the policy space. So currently transitioning between jobs, but before this, I was a researcher looking at the impact of the 1944 GI Bill on African-American servicemen. So looking at how that bill impacted, literally was legislated racistly. Sorry, I'm sick, so if I sound a little groggy, that's why. And how that has then had intergenerational impact for people since. And so I hope to continue to do work like that looks at how our policies have impacted marginalized communities and how we can work to change them so that communities can be included. And so that's, long story short, my view of the interfaith community is we analyze critically who we're bringing into the table, who isn't at the table, and how we could build ways to meaningfully include them.
Thank you both for that. It's so important to consider sort of the different spaces that you stand in when it comes to the work that you've had. Vanessa, working at SRF for 4 years in a giant interspiritual community, is a space that can oftentimes be very vast, but also very minimal. just because of the ways that you have to engage with such specific messaging. And Mariela, you engaging in spaces of policy where you're measuring the generational impact of how ways in which racist systems continue to function based on current democratic systems is a really important way for us to consider how the message of the cultures and patterns and systems of oppression can kind of continue. And it really rides on us to be able to think about the ways in which, you know, both of you coming to interfaith work while you were doing your undergraduate work is actually something that I'd like to center first before we enter the rest of the conversation. As people who are, you know, professionals in your own right, whether you're in transition or not, what brought you to interfaith cooperation in the first place? Because for many folks who might be coming on the call, knowing that Latino communities across Central and South America adhering to Catholicism kind of doesn't give room or thought about engaging with this idea of interfaith cooperation. Yet now when we look at Vanessa sort of adhering to more of Episcopalian beliefs, and Mariela, you following more of a secular humanist approach, it kind of makes people think about the ways in which the Latino community continues to engage with the ideas of religion and spirituality. So what brought each of you to wanting to do work in interfaith cooperation?
We always joke about this, but I wish I could bring out a giant pin that says, "What would Xandra do?" Because it really is Dr. Wagner who brought me into the interfaith space. I remember coming into Laverne 8 years ago. I don't know how many years ago, but a long time ago. I was actively trying to avoid any religion classes and trying to not have anything to do with that space. Oh, hello, Dr. Clark. It's really great to see you.
Hi, Dr. Clark. We're all shouting him out.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. Sorry, I'm late, but I just got out of another session that we were doing it. So I'm sorry, but I'm interested. So go.
Oh, you're good. Great to see you.
You too.
But truly, it was Intro to Religion with Dr. Wagner, where I actually got a perspective of religion, of different worldviews that was so different to what I grown up seeing Catholicism as. It really turned into something. I remember the sojourns that we used to go to, where we were encouraged to actively go to community spaces that were doing community service and welcoming people into their practices, were things that I never knew were a thing. And then once I started going to them, I got hooked and kept wanting to engage with different worldviews to learn more, and just to be in space where everyone is actively engaged and present and vulnerable. There's just something special about interfaith spaces that seem to lead with that and hold that space that so many other places I haven't really found. And so that's one of the things that continues to bring me into the interfaith space.
That's such a blast of the past, Mariela, hearing about the sojourns and just talking to Xandra for advice and things like that. It just gave me happy memories. But for me, I think it was a combination of two things. So the University of Laverne in the honors program makes you take, at the time it was called Global Ideas. Some people didn't like that class. I love that class. That class changed my life. And it was studying philosophy and different religions. And that was very intriguing to me, to actually get lectures on different ideas, different worldviews. But also I had a friend in my bio class, because I was a bio major at the time, which was hilarious because that's not even, that's not me at all, my personality. But so my friend, my classmate, was Muslim, and being raised Christian and being in a space my whole life, being Catholic Christian, that's all I really knew. And I realized I was so ignorant about just other worldviews, other perspectives, other cultures. And she knew a lot about my religion, because it's the majority. A lot of people understand the basics of Christianity, especially in LA. But I knew nothing about her religion, Islam. So when I was in a religion class, we had to go to a religious community, a temple or, a mosque. And I chose to go to a mosque and study Islam in order to understand her, my friend, who I valued and I cared about. So I think it really came down to like people wanting to understand people and wanting to be respectful when I had conversations with people from a different worldview. And so I sought out that knowledge and ended up having a minor in religion. Yeah. And then it came down to people, wanting to understand people.
Thank you both for sharing that. I think it's helpful to be able to center those perspectives as we're thinking about interfaith engagement, especially for, Latina voices as your own, because again, they're often not found in a lot of interfaith spaces around the United States, let alone in North America at large. And oftentimes that becomes a major problem when dealing with conversations of diversity, inclusion, and equity, where often things like the linguistic barrier, only speaking English, or not addressing issues of immigration policy, or not being intentional about creating a cultural awareness around the same holidays that many communities may celebrate, but not acknowledging that the Latina community may celebrate it in a different way, is posed by this reality that interfaith spaces can often be very monolithic. And I think it's important to be able to think about that from the context of what history has had to share about the work that we do now. We know that in the history of the Americas, there has been this reality around, religious syncretism, where things like Catholicism and indigenous traditions come together in different ways. There's the reality of things like trauma that comes from institutions like the Catholic Church, which create a complicated history for indigenous communities, and the future that we now see in the United States, where by 2050, we are expecting the United States to be a country that is a minority Christian nation, and one where the growing reality of spiritual but not religious people is going to increase and become one of the biggest percentages. And I guess my question is, for each of you in thinking about those realities, how do you think this all speaks to the future of religion and spirituality within the Latinx community that you've come from and grown up in? There is, of course, the reality that you've grown up with parents or families that have given you this exposure to Catholicism in your explicit experiences. Whereas going forward, if you were to have the choice to have children, or if you knew people of your age that wanted to have children, they may not actually give them the same options. So what does that mean going forward for the Latina community to deal with topics of religion and spirituality, in your opinion?
I can only speak for me personally, because that's a really tough question to heal. I'm gonna get married soon, and my therapist told me I should probably talk to my future husband about what religion we'd raise them, even though I'm so like religious intrigued by religion. I didn't really think to have that conversation beforehand, so my bad. But so when we had this conversation, I really was I was really open to any kind of exposure to religion for my future children, except I don't want them to ever be hurt by religion. So I would rather have them be spiritual, not religious, and not have any sort of trauma or hurt to have to overcome in their future adulthood, than to be religious and have to be put through something like that. So I don't know what that really means, if I really value my religion then, but because I really value my future children's well-being and mental health over anything, and myself as well, my own mental health. So I think for me personally, I see that our generation, maybe Mariela, you can agree with this, but our generation, we have trauma from our community of not being open about speaking about mental health or about different identities in the Catholic Church and community. and not seeing the Catholic Church willing to work on certain issues, I think that our future children, like their well-being is more important than spirituality.
Which, congratulations, Vanessa, on the engagement. That's
Thank
so exciting. Oh yeah, this is definitely a hard one. I would say, kind of going backward and then forward, is initially I would say that I wouldn't have wanted to join the interfaith space if I thought I had to join as a person who was 100% committed to a worldview or a world, like a religion. Not that being atheist is a lack of a religion, but in some sense it has that connotation. And so before I was familiar with the interfaith space, I would have assumed that I couldn't be involved or I couldn't participate as actively because of that point of origin. And obviously that wasn't the case. I feel like we all got really hooked on the interfaith space and the communities there and participated throughout all our 4 years at Laverne. But I think moving forward, one of the reasons why maybe I haven't been as involved, or maybe would also shy away from having, my children or other people I know, is that there is a sense of like frustration with how unintersectional it is. I've interned and worked with a lot of, or not a lot, but some interfaith organizations, and it seems like a lot of them are very insular and have established ideals about doing nonviolence work and peace work in a certain way, but oftentimes that way tends to leave some conversations, some people out. And that's the story for so many spaces. The policy space, I focus on immigration, and a big community in the immigration space that's being left out is the Black community. Haitians continuously are not seen as like Latino and immigrants and all of that, so like that's a huge issue. So every space has an issue, but that was just one within the interfaith space that I couldn't get my comfort around, kind of similar to what Vanessa was talking about, was just how it really did seem that there was only in some types of conversation where people who were LGBTQ could be included, and then there was some other types of conversations where it was okay to talk about racism and microaggressions and things, but other spaces where it wasn't. And so it felt like I had to keep putting on different hats in different spaces, and it was tiring. And so I think, these are all my own personal perspectives and beliefs, and why maybe I feel maybe other people could be hesitant to get involved in the space, and why so often, Latino, Latinx people are as involved.
That's both of you just really touched on something that is something that I want to go forward with, Mariela, because intersectionality has been a major problem in interfaith spaces. There is no doubt about that. There has been a constant conversation that the only issue of struggle when it comes to interfaith cooperation is that the only diversity they seem to achieve is that of religion and spirituality itself, and not the nuance of all of the other social identities that impact a person that oftentimes have to get checked at the door. And it makes me want to ask that bigger question of each of you as you think about it, that, coming from a Latina background, what do you find there to be as a challenge when trying to engage in interfaith work, or even the work of justice and equity? What does it look like to be someone whose cultural and ethnic background is unfortunately not centered in spaces where it accompanies you at all times? And I pose that question because I think oftentimes people don't think about the realities in which, culture and ethnicity often get so overlapped with religion and spirituality that they can sometimes be seen as one and the same. And that unfortunately, people assume that if you have quote unquote a Catholic background, then being Latino and being Catholic is almost the same thing. And it takes away from the nuance that is folks like Mariela, who have often entered the space and are like, actually, I don't identify with the sole religious conviction. Or folks like Vanessa who say, I don't identify with the same religious conviction. So what does it mean for you to see sort of the space where you engage in this work, but you know that one of your identities is being left out of the conversation?
So let me know if I stray from the question, but one example or instance that comes to mind is IFYC hosts a lot of grants and scholarship programs for alumni to continue to get involved within the interfaith space. And one of the ones that they did 2 years ago or last year that was really cool was an anti-racism within the interfaith space program. And so I had someone who is secular and atheist signed up to be part of that, to organize a intergenerational BIPOC mentorship and leadership program. And, it was, anyway, all of that to say, one of the issues with getting approval for that was having to communicate actively with the administration to justify how this could be considered within the interfaith space as like interfaith work, even though I tried explaining that I was secular and that in my point of view, any space where we were actively discussing our identities and our ways of being and how we're choosing to live in the world, and then also like mentoring and developing skills to do that effectively is engaging, in interfaith work, I would hope. But it was just something where I had to write in that I was going to actively ask them to discuss their religion or their relationship with religion in order to be able to have it classified as interfaith work, rather than using the broader term of identity. And so that was just one example where I kind of felt uncomfortable and I had to bend my own perspective and my own way of being to kind of fit more into the interfaith space. And so that's one way where I feel like, while normally when we're having a conversation, of course, it's okay for you to have different worldviews. There are some times where it gets to be like, oh, we want a little bit more because this is what we're used to. And it just gets a little uncomfortable. Yeah, that was one instance. Let me know if I went too far off the question.
You're completely fine. Thank you for that. Vanessa?
For me, I don't have like a solid answer for this question. And I think it's because I'm white passing. Because like so I attended a Presbyterian church regularly. I was very involved. I was on one of their commissions. I designed their logo. I created a Facebook page for them. Don't ask me why they didn't have a Facebook page, but that's another story. And so because they were predominantly white, like I blended in. So I can't really answer this question equally, because like, although I may like fit into the box, right? If you look around the room, like it doesn't mean that I fit in like my identity and like my experiences. And that's always my struggle, is that like I may not experience some of the like the struggles or the experiences of other Latinas because I'm so white passing, but it doesn't mean that I also I connect with the white experience as well, because like the Latina community, I'm really rambling too, Mariela. Sorry, you're not even I'm the one who's rambling this time. But like I think I'm just getting this off my chest because I've thought about it for a while. But like the Latina identity and experience is not just about like your religion, but it's also about your socioeconomic background, your family values, your family dynamic, and things like that. So yeah, I don't know if I can answer this question. I think it's because of this long explanation I'm giving.
Well, actually, Vanessa, you're touching on something very important there that I think it's important for people to consider, is that the Latina experience is also not monolithic, even within a specific country context. And that country specifically being the United States, where Many folks may be white passing. Many people may be solely English speakers, even though they have Latino backgrounds,
Mhm.
and have to still grow up within the same Latino Catholic culture that can often be vastly different and almost ostracizing in a way. So you're
Yeah.
actually touching on something that's important there, because oftentimes, even within the sole context of being with your community, you are often treated like an outsider.
Yeah.
And that is a reality for a lot of first and second generation American kids that are our age group, who happen to be born and raised in the United States or brought into the United States through certain circumstances, that grow up to be Americans and grow up with some connection to their identities, but then are forced to sit on a fence because they're not enough of something to have that sense of belonging.
Yeah.
I think you're touching that in a way that is very helpful for us to consider, the realities of, not being enough. Um, you are not Christian enough, you are not Catholic enough, you are not Latina enough, you are not enough of a Spanish speaker to be able to claim community or identity. So thank you for kind of bringing that in the way that you did. Don't worry about the rambling part. I do it all the time too.
Thank you.
Um, because in the grand scheme of things, that is why we are trying to have conversations like these. We want people to be candid for this reason. Oftentimes, it's not easy to answer questions around this because people have not been given the platform or opportunity to do so. And we want to be very intentional that you both are coming in as very intersectional people, period. You don't have the same background, word for word. You don't have the same experiences word for word. And we want to always give that space to each of you to be able to express it as you feel comfortable. So just remember to keep that in mind. And of course, those of you who are listening at the moment, think about that as you're reflecting, and think about that as you might consider asking questions of Mariela or Vanessa. Um, so another question that I want to ask when it comes to um, engaging in the work that you both have in the different spaces that you're involved in, what does it look like then, for each of you who have been involved in interfaith work before, or interspiritual work before? What does it look like for you to have these spaces be more focused on things like centering social justice or community organizing? Because we both understand, all three of us understand that um, interfaith cooperation work doesn't look the same anywhere that you go. But sometimes, unfortunately, people get so comfortable with things like dialogue and relationship building that it doesn't evolve outside or burst the bubble that it needs to be a part of the real world. And you both have engaged and have had conversations on some pretty challenging topics when we've had our one-on-ones. So I'm kind of curious in your mind what it would look like for you if you had that power to, and you still have that power actually, to center justice and community organizing in an interfaith space. What would be the most effective way of doing that in your opinion?
I would say with imagining Jackie here, I would say we've kind of done it already. In that, like, a thing that we all have in common, Vanessa, Jackie, and I, is that we were all involved with the Department of Community Service. Like, literally, Vanessa, I'm pretty sure that you worked there, as did Jackie.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, and then I also pretty much live there all the time. Beyond them having amazing people, it was a really great way that we would kind of all engage, because even though we were all also involved in interfaith work, us being involved with the Department of Community Service, doing a lot of community service work, organizing events on campus, especially like Jackie and I were involved in a lot of like college Dems work. We were doing a lot of on-campus political organizing. And at least to me, that was kind of imagining social justice work, in that we had this like perfect triangle balance of engaging actively within interfaith work, in that we're engaging a diverse group of community regardless of, or welcoming of, like, a wide array of perspectives and identities, to be present intentionally, and to interact compassionately with one another, to do work that was going to make the world a better place. And we did that, which was really, really beautiful. And to me, that's what social justice work looks like and is that like, you don't necessarily have to be actively talking about how, me as an atheist, this is why I'm here and this is how it means. It'd be great if that's, through repeated instances of coexistence and working together, that opening and getting to know each other happens naturally, but it's not something that should be like, I'm doing this because I want to tell you about da 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 da. But it is something that, slowly but surely builds common ground and makes the world a better place.
Tahil, you asked really hard questions. I agree. I totally agree with Mariela. I think that the way the community service office, like Office of Community Engagement, operates. I mean, University of Laverne is the HSI. Sorry, I can't spell. Hispanic Serving Institution. So I think like it really focuses on that of giving voices to underrepresented communities. Like one of the things, like Mariela said, I worked at the Office of Civic and Community Engagement, and the highlight of my time working there was working to organize the LEAD conference, which I think it doesn't exist anymore. I don't know if Xandra or Tahil can, clarify that, but it was the Latino Education Access and Development Conference. And I think that was such an important platform to give information, like about applying to colleges and applying to scholarships for first-gen students, right? And of course, I'm sure Xandra had like a prayer at the beginning or like invocation. So there wasn't like an outwardly interfaith like conversation happening, but it was there. Like there was Aztec dancers, there was like Mariela, you're nodding your head, you know what I'm talking about. Like it just was a beautiful experience, and I wish it still existed. And I'm glad I got to witness it like at least 2 times, maybe more than that. But in terms of like now, like the work that we're doing now outside of college, I think something that like kind of shocked me when I left college was like, it's not as easy to do interfaith week work. Like people aren't as like curious, And when I first started working at Self-Realization Fellowship, my coworker who was from New York, she told me, like, she's like, oh, LA is so segregated. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We're so diverse. There's so much culture and history and different spiritualities. She's like, yeah, there is diversity, but it's separated. So from one city to another, you have these bubbles. And I didn't really realize that growing up in LA. So like my partner is from Huntington Park, and that's a bubble of Latinos there. Like my future mother-in-law does not speak English, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I mean, she can exist in that space, Huntington Park, because it's such a bubble, and she never had to learn English or anything like that. She thrives in that community. And when I see that, I feel like when we do interfaith work, usually the people that show up are the ones who already feel comfortable in those spaces. Like I don't see anyone really being challenged to like have conversations, or like, I'm not really sure what that looks like, but like I think that when I picture Huntington Park or like communities like that, I feel like there's a bubble of one spirituality, but like I would like to see more conversations, more work that like is the second half of interfaith engagement, right? Like, so it's the conversations, and then of course it's the social justice work. So like I just feel like interfaith communities need to broaden their social justice work so that more people feel comfortable talking to Buddhists and atheists. And like a Hispanic atheist like Mariela isn't so like, like out of the norm, because I know that like her voice is special, and there's a lot of voices out there like that.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, and I think what you're saying is a part of that framing, Vanessa, which is I think really helpful. Is it's if we're going to even talk about social justice or equity or anything like that, it all has to start with accessibility. If the
Mhm.
space is not accessible, then how can we think of this space evolving to address things that are related to social justice? Whether
Yeah.
it's statistics, whether it's cultural awareness or sensibilities, whether it is as simple as even things like transportation, because oftentimes interfaith spaces are accused of being pretty privileged. Um, what kind of expectation do we have to um, host a space to have important dialogue when we're not even allowing people to come in and access it properly? Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, that I think is very, very helpful. I was just about to introduce our colleague who was with us and then she disappeared again. So fingers crossed she'll hopefully come back and have an opportunity to share. Um, but with that in mind, let's just sort of continue the conversation. I'm kind of curious, from each of your perspectives, based on what we've talked about so far. Um, do you feel like religion and spirituality um, play either positive or negative roles in your life and in the life of the Latina community? Um, and I'm asking that question because um, I want there to be you too, and Jackie as well when she gets the chance are the right people to ask this question, because I know we've had these conversations, and I feel like there's an important way for us to be able to um, talk about the honesty of young people in addressing religion and spirituality candidly. So wherever you're standing based on where you've been exposed to religion and spirituality, have you felt that it has an important place in your life, positively or negatively? And do you feel that same question towards the community at large?
I think both positive and negative. And let me elaborate. So with the people I've experienced, the Latinas I know, I feel that sometimes religion is rigid for them, and it gives them these rules and obligations that burden their life. But I think that's because of the dogma, the superficial part of religion, right? So Paramahansa Yogananda, who founded Self-Realization Fellowship, talked a lot about how religion must rise above the dogma and the doctrines, and just the idea of having to go to church every Sunday and pray the rosary every day. Those, I think that's on a superficial level. So I think when you're given, like, it goes back to that accessibility, I guess. When you're given the education to see religion on a deeper level, like I had the privilege of doing at University of Laverne. I had the honor and the opportunity, and I'm grateful for that. Religion for me personally has had a tremendous positive effect on me. Before, I saw religion as like a guidebook, like the do's and don'ts, if I want to get into heaven, things like that. But again, it was very superficial and I didn't really understand religion that well. Now, like, my spirituality, although it's a little bit like up in the air on exactly like if I'm Catholic or Presbyterian or Episcopalian, it is the life, and it is like the air I breathe, it is what motivates my every action and my reaction to people, and to my experiences, and how I overcome my struggles, and how I reflect on my experiences. So it is tremendous. I can't talk. It is a tremendous source of positivity for me. But I think I'm grateful. I'm privileged to have a deeper understanding of religion, so that it doesn't negative affect have a negative effect on my life.
Mariela?
Well, first off, Jackie, it's so good to see you. I miss you. Hope you're doing well. Ooh, yeah, this is definitely interesting, hard question. The thing that came to mind was recently I was listening to this audiobook called Finding Latinx in Search of the Voices Redefining Latino Identity by Paola Ramos. You know, who's the daughter, they are the daughter of you know, Jorge Ramos, iconic Latino reporter, journalist, and they did a really interesting book interviewing different people who fall within the realm of Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Latine, like indigenous community within Latin America, North America, all of that, and asking them how they identify, how their personal identity clashes or goes with, the cultural worldview of what being Latinx means. And they just shared really great perspectives on, there is no perfect way, and it's all kind of morphing and has been changing and evolving throughout the years and is continuing to, and how kind of beautiful and interesting that all is. But one of the things that came to mind specifically with this question was the idea of how religions and worldviews continue to morph. And I think that would be one way that I could see myself more included, is if I could find a space where there was more of an opening and encouragement for those metamorphoses within practices and worldviews, that would make the interfaith space more welcoming and encouraging. It's just how, like, every time there would be a space that was just like automatically welcoming and inquisitive and all of that. And one of the things that came to mind was just way back when, I always bring this up, but they were hiring a Spanish and a religions professor at Laverne, and we got the opportunity to sit in some of the interviews. And one of the people came in and talked about how they focused on how Catholicism had and a lot of indigenous communities within the Caribbean had been mixed together to create kind of their own version of Catholicism, and how a lot of worshiping of different saints had also had mixtures of their original indigenous saints. And that was just one moment where my mind was completely blown, because I was only familiar with doing Catholicism one way. And so just to have that moment in a classroom to kind of learn and see something that I'd seen as very like stringent evolve and grow kind of gave me hope for Catholicism. And that's kind of the hope that I hope to be able to carry within the interspaces. It's just like one day walk up and learn like, oh no, it's totally okay to be this way, and guess what, we're already doing it this way. And it's just been like, oh cool, yes, let's go. So that's what I'm hoping for.
That's really great, Mariela. I appreciate that. Jackie, welcome. We're so happy you could make it. I want to ask you the same question, but first I actually want to ask you sort of the introductory question, just so that people get familiarized with you in the space. The question is, what identities, communities, and professional background experiences bring you to this conversation today?
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much. And so much love for everyone here. I can't believe it hasn't happened before, but thank you for setting this up, Zandra, Tahil. My name is Jacqueline Perez, Valencia, she, her pronouns. Proud Latina, graduated from Laverne in 2017. And what brings me to this conversation in space? Well, first, Tahil reached out and shared that I would be in a conversation with Vanessa and Mariela, and right away I was like, of course. I love them. I actually got to work with y'all, and some of my best memories at Laverne that I have. And for me, I think I'm always wrestling with my own identity and religion and my spirituality. Now more than ever, I feel, and I don't know why, or I haven't really had time to reflect on it because I've been very caught up in the go, go, go of the days. But I think I'm always trying to push myself to help others come together in service. And I see that a lot of the service to do service tend to be identifying a specific religion, and my purpose is to kind of bridge those people to come together for the greater good. And I learned all that through my work at Laverne and through my like conversations with Zandra, with Mariela, Tahil, of course, and Vanessa, amongst others. And I feel like I want to continue that, and I think I heard parts, sorry, I kept coming in and out, but I heard parts of what Vanessa and Mariela were sharing, and I want to bring that in my work. I had like a small win I'll share. We're drafting like the agenda for our retreats, and it's very policy based, but I told them, I was like, hey, have y'all considered like any religious practices, because we're creating an agenda for meals, for downtime and things like that. And we literally added one question, which was like, do you have any practices, religious practices or non-religious practices, and do you need any accommodations? And we had so many responses, and like no one ever had done that before, at least to my knowledge, in my organization. And to me, it was just one simple win, like one small little question, but it meant a lot. One of the persons came up to me and was like, thank you for giving me like this room, because now I can go and pray. And it was like mind blown, because they felt seen and heard. And I'm constantly trying to bridge those places, because again, in policy, you know, it's not meant to, religion is not meant to be in that space necessarily, but really is in certain aspects, and many aspects. I see head nods. So yeah, it's just, how do we ensure that it's still a space where people can feel comfortable bringing up their religious identity or non-religious identity into a space and not feel like icky about it.
Thank you for that. I think that kind of example kind of leads into the question that we posed to Vanessa and Mariela about, what role, positive or negative, do religion and spirituality play in your life personally and in the life of the communities that you come from or represent? And if there's a specific way you'd want to address that based on the example that you gave, or if there's anything else you'd want to like center as a part of the conversation, Jackie, I want to give you the space for that.
I'm just thinking, yeah, I think thankfully I haven't gotten much pushback. It has been like just something that I have in my personal experience have had trouble bringing. As I think I heard Vanessa say, it's like it was easy at Laverne and easy in our bubble because people were like open to it or just kind of like nicely said no. And now in like this real world, it's like kind of hard to kind of gauge. Like I feel like I have to have like really gotten to know the person to then get into talking about religion and spirituality. So I think it's more up to me to kind of figure out a way to feel comfortable and build that up. Thankfully, so I haven't received much pushback other than my own, and then I need to work on that.
Thanks for that, Jackie. I'm gonna now try to ask a bit of an easier question based on Vanessa's request from earlier. And I want to think that the question is easier because I feel that a lot of the experiences that you've had in interfaith spaces and in the work that you've done in your professional careers can help you really think about the ways that some of your identities may not be centered, particularly your ethnic and cultural identity. So what can spaces of faith and interfaith actually do better to include and listen and fulfill the needs of Latina community members? What could interfaith spaces be doing that's making sure that Latina folks actually feel welcome and willing to be able to engage in interfaith cooperation?
So I think there's two parts to this, like to my answer. One is to just make it more accessible, like we were talking about. And at Self-Realization Fellowship, where I recently worked, we're actually really good at this because we had a huge SRF like community of meditators in Brazil and Latin America, which surprised me when I first got there because I'm like, Catholics meditate? Like I thought we were like, you know, there was for a while when like yoga was seen as like, I don't know, like just like satanic or something. Like, but I was pleasantly surprised that we have a huge meditating community in the Latin world. So we would always have subtitles on our inspirational service videos in Spanish, Portuguese, German, and sometimes Japanese too. But at least for the Latino communities, Portuguese and Spanish, we always had subtitles. We had all our books translated into Spanish and Portuguese. We had the SRF lessons, which is like an at-home study where you can study Yogananda's teachings on meditation and Kriya Yoga specifically. Were in Spanish, Portuguese, like all these languages. And it, like SRF is an international organization, but I really think that they were doing the work to make it accessible to every community. And so I think you can, although they're an international organization with resources to do that, volunteers who translated, as well as the translation department that I worked with closely, that made it easy for anyone to join in another country. Oh, and also there's a fee for the SRF lessons, but in other countries that $90 fee is way like too much for someone in like Venezuela. So regularly I would have, because I manage the social media pages, so regularly there was messages saying like, you know, I can't afford this in this country that I'm at, like Colombia, Venezuela. So there was a like lessons assistance program to where donations could be put towards paying for someone's either a portion or all of the lessons fee, right? So I think they did a great job of making it accessible to people in other countries and in other languages. So I think we could kind of copy that with spaces, having it accessible to just on that level, just being able to understand and being able to afford something, right? So I think that's one part. And the second part, I think we really, and I think Tahil, you're great at this, right? Like you guys organize this, you know, this panel, but I think it's really important to make sure that the voices of leadership are people from those communities, right? So like Tahil, we've talked about this one-on-one before, but like the people who end up leading the conversations or like doing the interfaith week work are like white Christian men or like men from the Abrahamic religions, you know? So I think that, for example, at SRF, they wouldn't be happy if I was talking so much about them maybe, but these are all positive things. But at SRF, like there was a lot of nuns and monks who had a Latina background. So I think when COVID happened and everything was online, suddenly the nuns who weren't really speaking as much and weren't in the public eye were in the public eye. So those were women, right? So, and we got the most responses on social media when nuns gave, you know, inspirational services, right? As well as, although there are a lot of white older men in power in religious spaces, in leadership roles, there were a lot of Latina men and women in the SRF community in the leadership roles who regularly gave lectures and spoke about their experience as a nun or a monk in the SRF space, right? So I think like I think that's something the SRF did really well, is just be so diverse, but make sure that diversity is shown in the leadership that's there. Yeah, and I think that's what I would like to see in other spaces. SRF identifies as non-sectarian, so they don't really adhere to a certain religion. It's more like spiritual. But if we can see that in other interfaith spaces, in conversations with other religions, as well as the religious communities themselves, I think that would be a great start. That's not all of it, but that's a great start.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that, Vanessa. Mariela, Jackie, either of you?
I can share. I think definitely echo that, Vanessa. And I think one thing I'll add is like leadership opportunities. I think when, again, along the same lines of like investing, Vanessa, leadership opportunities, I feel like as you leave college, they're very minimal. And there's so much that we can do that, yeah, that can be done to support in order to do the work. Because, for example, like hosting, I know I've done a few through the funds that I get from IFYC. I'm able to host like a conversation where I can like feed people and I can like give them the opportunity to come together. But I feel like it's so much harder to do things if you're don't have the leadership experience that is needed. So if I wasn't taking, time to go off and do a conference, I would not be able to have the knowledge that I need to then come and facilitate that same session with my own community. So I think that kind of goes back to investing and ensuring that the people that are directly in the community get the resources and have the space.
Mariela?
Yeah, kind of tag teaming the last question. This question is one of the things that I really like when I talk with people about religion nowadays. Oftentimes, it's with close friends, and we talk actually about like our religious trauma experience and kind of being vulnerable about difficult issues that we've had in the past with religions and like religious leaders, and how that's unfolded and how that's influenced our lives and maybe influenced us to do something differently or to interact with the world in a certain way. And strangely enough, that's one of the things that I think I would love to see more of within the interfaith space. And specifically, I think one of the things that would include more Latinx community members is just this practice of like talking actively of some of the harms that have been done in the past within this space. Because at least for me, oftentimes it feels like this is a sanitized space where you can only talk about the good stuff and not be authentic and genuine about some of like the resentment and internalized trauma that still lingers within a lot of us, and within those repeated kind of false interactions. At least for myself, I've often felt kind of uncomfortable when overall it's just not necessarily able to be my full self when I feel like I can't speak openly about different diverse experiences. And so that's one thing that I think would work towards being and building more inclusive spaces. It's just not necessarily having them be censored or within certain bounds of conversation.
Awesome. Absolutely. Making that discomfort transformative rather than a deterrent for engaging with what's happening in the world, because it's not always frilly, it's not always beautiful, engaging stuff. It is really difficult stuff that impacts people on the ground and sustains oppression, unfortunately. So it's good to be able to center that. With that in mind, I want to give you three a bit of a breather and a break, and kind of leave it to any of the folks who are, still on the call at the moment to take a minute or so to be able to reflect on something they may have heard today and put it in the chat. Even you as speakers, if there's something that one of the other speakers said that really resonated with you, now would be a good time to like type it out and really think about it. And we also just want to give people an opportunity in the panel and in the audience to be able to ask any questions of you all as we share space today. So I'll just leave a minute, of silence just to make sure you all can do what you'd like. But if anyone feels compelled to ask a question also, we'll give that opportunity in a minute. Mm. So, Dr. Clark actually posted a question in the chat, which might be a question that I might be able to give a bit of insight on just in my work, but it's a general question that's been posed also of how much interfaith activity is actually occurring in the Latinx community. And if any of you have thoughts, of course, then please jump right in and answer if you have a sense, either locally or in whatever spaces you're working in.
I can jump in.
Mhm.
From my perspective. It's not necessarily interfaith as we imagine and do, but rather like community engagement work that's being done within the Latinx community. And I feel like a lot of that happens naturally. I don't know. I just feel like, anytime I'm back home or in an area that I have a strong presence or consistent presence, if I'm ever sick, people are bringing me food. People are helping take care of me. If other people that I know of need rides, there's transportation, there's community gatherings for different things. There's a sense of love and togetherness when things happen, organizing. And a lot of that to me falls under interfaith activity. And it's not necessarily this thing that's like, oh, we're getting together intentionally because of our Catholic or worldviews, but rather like being Latinx means that we're here for each other. It means that we celebrate each other, but we also help mourn each other in whatever moment in time that comes, and we show up and we're there. And I've always seen that happen a lot, and it's one of the reasons why I love whenever I get to go back to California, because it's always this like strong wave of togetherness. And before this, I lived in Massachusetts, and I had the opportunity to live in this area that had a lot of Salvadorian, Guatemalan immigrants living in that space. And so even there, it was beautiful to see that, like, I just moved here, and I would be walking down the street and I'd be hearing Spanish. People would say hi to me. People would kind of help me out, giving me rides with the snow and things like that. I got a turkey from my school for Thanksgiving, and it was just, me. So I gave it to my neighbors, and they loved it, and they gave me leftovers. And doing that type of space and engaging with each other is just one of the things that I think of comes naturally in a lot of these spaces, and it's just beautiful, and for me falls under the idea of interfaith activity.
Vanessa or Jackie, did you have any thoughts to share?
No thoughts about Dr. Clark's question, which is a good question. I don't think I'm qualified to answer that, but I think Tahil, you'll know a good answer. I just wanted to say, Mariela, like that just sounds so good. Like I miss that. I'm in Glendale right now, and I don't I don't see enough Latinos here, so I feel a little bit left alone right now. Like I'm not in my space of community right now. And I heard someone speak Spanish on the street today, but like that's not very common when I was walking my dog, and I was like, oh, that sounds good, you know. So I just wanted to say I miss that, Mariela, and I'm glad that you found that in Massachusetts and where you are now. Are you back in California then? I think you're muted. New York, that's even cooler. But yeah, so you're finding that wherever you go, which is great. Maybe I need to work on that here in Glendale.
Thanks for that,
Yeah.
Vanessa. Jackie?
I think, yeah, I'll definitely leave this to you, Tahil, to share, because I think personally in my own space and bubble that I'm in, I have seen a version, as Mariela said, of it, in the sense of, unfortunately, we all know, you know, we're still facing COVID, and I've seen a lot of people pass away and people come together in that sense. So that's kind of the interfaith work I've seen, in the sense that people reach out to people and people come together despite their religious views, because they know how much it's important for community to be together. But in my own bubble, I wish I would see it more. But that's the extent of it. So in my views.
No, thank you for that. I can see where it might make sense for me to sort of answer the question, and I'm glad to do it. I work in the space to be able to answer that question in some ways. So if we're speaking about it in the context of the United States, that experience of interfaith cooperation actually doesn't exist in an explicit or an intentional way. Where we actually find where interfaith work is happening is in a lot of social justice and community organizing spaces, where folks working on the same issue happen to be coming from different faith backgrounds. So the best way that I've actually seen that is a lot of spaces where immigrants' rights or rights for undocumented people are being addressed. There are a lot of folks that, oh dear, what just happened? Can you all hear me still? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know what happened. And of course, it has to happen when my computer decides to just fall apart. We've noticed in organizations like Faith in Action in the United States and Clue, which is a specific organization in the Los Angeles area, have an explicit focus on immigration rights. And these are spaces that are very, where a significant percentage of the population is Latino, and they work in Latino spaces. And the ability to be able to curate interfaith dialogue between them and across other communities is very significant, because there is a lot of the shared experience in addressing the rights of immigrants communities in dealing with things like the roadmap to citizenship, to dealing with ICE and the CBP when it comes to the Department of Homeland Security, and a number of different ways where workers' rights actually have to be involved too, because many immigrant communities in places like taxi driving, agriculture, nail businesses, and the like, actually come together to form alliances across religious differences to be able to help build the network and movement necessary to be able to hold major corporations accountable and stuff like that. So it's been really powerful to see that in states like California, where a lot of the work is around spaces of agriculture. We have folks who have worked with the Dolores Huerta Foundation who are very intentional to reach out to other interfaith and intercultural partners. There's a significant taxi workers alliance in New York where they do a lot of that interfaith work explicitly, and the Latino community is very involved in that conversation. But if we're talking about, the Latin community at large, in the Americas, the United Religions Initiative has a specific regional cohort of about 63 organizations that go through Central and South America, where there is intentional interfaith cooperation happening between Latino communities across the religious and spiritual and secular spectrum. And they have explicit relationships with trying to work with indigenous communities in each of those countries, in trying to make sure that their rights are being protected, that their land is being kept as sacred, and that they're able to have forms of cultural and educational preservation for things like language, for things like traditional practices, dances, foods, stuff like that. And that are facing a lot of different kinds of challenges because of governments like the country of Brazil, which is constantly trying to actually attack the Amazon rainforest, where a lot of indigenous communities still are trying to exist and thrive. Interfaith communities are trying to play their role in pushing back as much as possible against sort of the illegal burning and the attacking of these communities, and where, albeit the momentum might be very minimal because of just that type of engagement, it doesn't stop interfaith communities from doing what they can to center the voice of these indigenous peoples. So hopefully that answers just the surface level of your question, Dr. Clark. Cool. Do any other questions come to mind? Zandra, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask?
I wanted to just speak in appreciation. And if anyone then has a thought in addition to that, number one, just an appreciation, of course, to the three of you who I care for dearly. So the thing that's striking me from this conversation is in privileged or colonial spaces, interfaith can be a free-floating conversation that can just be a dialogue, I suppose. And what I hear in this conversation, whether we want to call it an explicit interfaith space, maybe it is, maybe it isn't at times, but here, what I'm hearing from the three of you is interfaith work never floats free from the lived experiences and challenges and struggles and joys of an actual community of peoples, right? It's and so it doesn't have to be called interfaith. It might be, but it doesn't have to be, and that it's like shifting the focus so that it's, well, I said it in my text, but just this action of worldviews that I really hear. And I don't know if any of that's resonating or not, but I'm appreciating that piece.
That's absolutely right, Sandra. I think in the definition of interfaith cooperation, often people struggle with the language or the jargon that make it more inclusive. And the reality is that even by not naming it, if you can see it in action, it's something that can be so easily noticed and so easily valued that it can continue to live and thrive in a space where it just happens. And interestingly enough, for much of the Latina community, much of that interfaith work is already happening, but it just doesn't look like the typical interfaith space, like you've said. It doesn't look colonized or privileged. It looks cultural, it looks community organizing, and it looks, most importantly, like serving one another unconditionally. So thank you for reminding us of that. So with that in mind, we just have a last few minutes. So Vanessa, Jackie, Mariela, I just want to share just immense gratitude with each of you for sharing your time, your insight, and your wisdom today. It's been really helpful, and I just want to give you each about 60 seconds to sort of share a parting message of any kind if you would like to. Just answering a simple question of what do you hope for interfaith work to look like in the future as you, all three of you, continue to be leaders in it?
Sorry, I literally unmuted myself when my dog started making noise. Stop, Bella. she's like, feed me. Sorry. I think that going back to that little realization when my coworker said like LA is segregated, I like to see interfaith spaces more diverse, like less segregated. And I think the conversations that we're used to having, like Xandra said, come here. The conversations we're used to having, like Xandra said, it's a privilege to have those conversations. And I think she clarified what I've been trying to do since graduating, because it's not easy to have these conversations. Not everyone like us here is able to show up in a conversation and listen and learn. I think it's a privilege to be able to do that in a safe space and create that safe space. But from what I've experienced, I'm not saying might be a generalization, and I don't mean about everyone, but the Latina community I've experienced has struggled a lot with like their immigration journey, and so sometimes they have a survivalist mentality to life, and that doesn't provide them space or energy to put towards interfaith work. So I think that's why like the idea of showing how to be an interfaith leader through my actions and less my words is what I would have tried to do since graduating, what I've kind of had to realize, that like I can teach inclusivity and pluralism through my actions and acceptance and love, but I don't really have to talk about it to share that part of my life.
Thank you, Vanessa.
I can go ahead and thank you, Vanessa. I think that made me think of so much. As far as I agree, I think a lot of the Latino community is always focused on like survival. You said it perfectly. And I think what can be done and what I hope to see in the world is just a lot more support for one another, no matter what, no matter our differences, just a lot of more support for one another, community, and just love. I think I want to see more people happy, and that means, I think to your point, Xandra, interfaith work will look a lot of different ways because people show up in different ways, and accepting that as interfaith work and seeing how it can really improve the lives of many people, no matter the way that it shows up.
Yeah, I would say an intersectional multitude of drops that's like a wave. One of my favorite quotes from this book called Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell is about how this slave owner is telling his son-in-law, who's leaving the family business to be an abolitionist, that he is a single drop in a wide ocean, that he's never going to accomplish anything. And the abolitionist responds and says, but what is an ocean but a multitude of drops? And so that's kind of my perspective for interfaith work, and what I hope it can be is that, you know, we can all be satisfied and feel included and accomplished in our own individual drop, but that drop can be part of an inclusive community that's coming together for the greater good and you know, creating something beautiful and natural. So, you know, just imagine that.
May the abundance of all of us individual drops create a world ocean that just continues to splash. For sure, for sure. Vanessa, Jackie, Mariela, thank you three so much for the wisdom you brought today. Seriously, it makes me feel privileged that I've gotten to share space with you, and I'm very thankful that I continue to learn from all three of you. So thank you all so much. And with that, I want to thank everyone else for sharing their time and their space with us as we wrap up this event today. We will be having our final panel for the Building the World series coming up sometime in late November, early December, centering the voices of our Indigenous and First Nation siblings. So please stay tuned for the details about that, because that will be a panel to really wrap up this conversation. So thank you all once again, and we look forward to sharing space with you soon. Take care.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you all.
So good to see you all. Thank you.
Yes. Bye.
Bye-bye. I feel better, Mariela. And Jackie, I'm thinking about you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Off to soccer practice. Bye.
Nice seeing you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Lily.
Ah,
Oh my, it was a good conversation.
yes,
Small crowd. I don't know why we're just not getting participation.
and you know that is okay. I take your advice on this every time. Whoever needed to show up
Yeah.
showed up. So
Yep. Absolutely.
and for some reason I cannot seem to end this recording because I
Oh,
have been kicked off on my computer
oh, I see. Okay. No worries. I suppose it'll just stop.
in the call. But yeah, it is totally okay. We had the people that wanted to show up.
Mhm.
From Campus Times messaged me and wants to ask some additional questions potentially. So
Good.
um, I'll be happy to follow up with her. And yeah, I think literally starting next week, I will put the new flyer together
Okay.
for the next conversation, and I will actually also start doing the asks for the different panelists.
Great.
And then
Thank
once I come back, maybe, well, actually, do you have your calendar open?
Yes.
Let us figure out this next date.
Great.
Would you think it would make more sense to do it after the Thanksgiving holiday?
Um, yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. Would December 8th, that Thursday, work?
It gets into finals and I can't do any events.
Got it.
I
Oh,
mean,
that's right. Could we do the first then?
um, possibly, let me see.
Because I forgot that Thanksgiving is earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Thanksgiving is the 24th. Uh, let me just check something really quickly. Sorry, I'm trying to find the day of an event. Oh, it's on Tuesday. Okay. Yeah, I think that should be fine. Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay, sounds good. Then I'll mark that in my calendar, and we can go with scheduling the Zoom link and stuff like that on your end.
Great, great. Okay,
Awesome.
perfect. All righty.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks for moderating and leading the conversation.
No problem. And Zandra, so I want to make a point of transparency about something.
Oh, yeah.
Tell any of them about being paid.
Okay.
So what I'm thinking of doing is I'm going to pay them anyway from my personal from my pocket, And I will try to see if there's a way to think about fundraising so that we can think for the next speakers and I can just get this money compensated later.
Okay, that's I don't like the so why don't I mean maybe we need to hold off on this last one until we get actual funding and
Okay.
see. I think that's yeah.
Because inevitably, I think what I'm gonna do next week is I'm gonna reach out to the diocese
Yeah,
and
that's
say, we're working on this, and it would just be helpful to have some more money to use. Could you give us another $1,000 to be able to pay speakers?
yeah.
And they honestly should be okay with that, which is why I have no issue just making sure that all three of them are paid now.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
long as you're going to ask that question of the diocese and yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I promise I will ask them.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good.
Uh,
All right.
To make sure that, like, even though we didn't have an explicit conversation, that they should be, we want to continue the process that everyone gets paid. So
Yeah. I think that's good. But if you don't hear a yes from, I should try to find some money from the university. Everything's a little bit tight. So I just don't have, but anyway, so I'd really like to hear what the diocese has to say, but I don't want this coming out of your personal pocket.
no worries. No worries. I will figure something out.
Okay, well, keep me informed, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks so much, Tahil.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye.